6, 5, 4-stage engine start, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff.
We close with good night, good luck, and God bless all of you on the good earth.
Welcome to Next Giant Leap, a podcast from GZERO's Blue Circle Studio and produced in partnership with MDA Space.
I'm Mike Massimino, Columbia engineering professor and former NASA astronaut.
And I'm Mike Greenley, CEO of MDA Space, a global leader in communication satellites, Earth and space observation, and space exploration and infrastructure.
Look up! You might not see them, but there are thousands of satellites in orbit above Earth. They play a role in countless aspects of modern life, from your GPS to how we grow the food we eat. They have made our world more connected and convenient than ever before. But that convenience comes with a new kind of vulnerability, because every one of those satellites can be jammed, hacked, blinded, or even destroyed. In a world that is increasingly reliant on space-based technology, space defense has become a significant military priority. Many countries are investing in new research and innovations aimed at protecting the safety of their citizens.
Today, on Next Giant Leap, we're exploring the role of space in military operations all over the world. From communications and navigation to surveillance, intelligence, and precision targeting, we'll discuss the specific tools and practices that militaries have adopted in space and what we can expect for the future of defense.
Mike Greenley, as space defense becomes more of a reality, we have to change our idea of what defense is. In your view, what does it mean to secure a domain with no borders?
This comes up a lot, I find, like in my work as a space company CEO and talking to investors and more lay people around the world to try to get this concept of like, where does defense play in? I try to talk to people about it as obviously the military has operations all around the world and they're using space as part of those operations for communications or surveillance. But then from a protection perspective and this notion of having no borders, we need to think of, I think, space more as infrastructure and critical infrastructure, whereby, any country and the companies in that country have infrastructure just like we do on Earth, but it's critical infrastructure in space. So it is the communications equipment and systems or the surveillance equipment and systems, or someday in the future, it'll be the, in-orbit industrial parks, or it'll be the mining assets or whatever it is that is, connected back to that host country. So we're trying to ensure we can do military operations, and we're trying to ensure that we can collectively defend and protect the critical infrastructure of any one nation that they happen to own and operate, but it's owned and operated in space.
And how do you think we're doing in this regard? We have a lot of work to do. Are we in good shape? How do you feel about it so far?
As an industrialist, I think it's very much emerging. Like, we're all getting used to it all because we're used to having military equipment on Earth. You've got helicopters and fighter jets and main battle tanks and ships and aircraft carriers and things. And those are military things. And then you've got civilian assets on Earth that, the military can come and help protect and defend. But in space, all our assets, I find anyway, are a little bit more mixed up, whereby some assets are owned and operated by militaries. Some commercial assets are providing services to militaries in terms of communication services or surveillance services. And so it's more complicated. We're starting to find mechanisms to be able to coordinate our activities. We have these things these days called commercial integration cells in a few of the countries in the world, whereby industrial representatives work inside space operations centers with militaries so that we're collectively sharing all of our knowledge about what's happening in space and trying to make sure that we're working together to protect and defend and keep sovereign those assets that we're operating. So it's the early days of combined activity within militaries and then within military and civilian corporations to be able to make it all work. So for me, it is sort of working, and we're getting more educated and better at it, but lots to learn and evolve as we go forward. But maybe the generals will say that we got this thing in the bag and everything's perfect so far. I don't know.
Well, thanks, Mike. And yes, let's go to the generals here. Let's introduce them. We're going to be bringing in two experts who have dedicated much of their careers to addressing these challenges firsthand. Kim Crider is a retired Major General in the U.S. Air Force with more than 35 years of service. She was the first ever Chief Technology and Innovation Officer for the United States Space Force. She is also a founding partner of Elara Nova, a consultancy focused on helping businesses and government agencies maximize the strategic advantages of space. We're also joined by Brigadier-General Chris Horner. He's the 3 Canadian Space Division Commander and Joint Force Space Component Commander for the Canadian Armed Forces, where he's responsible for space domain awareness, space-based support of military operations, and other military space capabilities. Thanks to you both for being here. And let's kick off the conversation with you, General Crider. Why do you think it is so crucial to invest in space defense innovation right now?
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, there's never been a more critical time for investing in space, primarily for many of the reasons that Mike was mentioning earlier. I mean, space is a very large place. There is a huge amount of interest in it. A good deal of that interest is adversarial. And those of us that are interested in space for the purposes of the free use of space have to be very concerned about those threats. We have to make sure that we have capabilities that are advanced and continue to advance to stay ahead of those threats, and to be able to do so in the very large domain that is space. We depend on space in so many ways. We depend on space not only for national security and defense, but certainly for commercial purposes as well. So given the dependency, given the threats, given the size of the domain, the only way to stay out in front, the only way to continue to maximize our ability to leverage the domain effectively is to invest in it. And the investments are, quite formidable. The United States Department of Defense in particular has been investing on the order of $73 billion in space. That's quite a bit of money when you think about what it takes. And I mean, I'm talking about over the decades that we've been involved in space. In this last year alone, the United States put in a request for $30 billion of capability in space. So the numbers are quite huge. But that certainly doesn't account for all of what we need to be able to do. So the only way that we can get the capabilities we need and to be able to leverage space as effectively as we can is to partner with industry and to partner with the investment community in particular, so that the investment community can also realize the benefits of investing in space, the benefits that space can provide to commercial ventures as well as to support government activities. But because we're so now focused on dual use capabilities and the ability to leverage space, as I mentioned, for commercial purposes as well as defense purposes, we're seeing the investment community rally behind investments in this domain and matching, if not surpassing, what the government is investing in on an annual basis.
So we've got this world of space that's increasingly being relevant to everyone's lives on Earth. We've got this activity that's growing and expanding, that to the extent that we just said that, even the U.S. government by itself can't do all the things that needs to be done to be able to take care of the operations in space, and we need to work, globally. So in this context, General Horner, how does Canada fit into this? What's Canada's strategic position in space and its vision for its approach to defense and security?
Thanks, Mike. What I would say is, you look back to 2017 when we produced the defense policy, Strong, Secure, and Engaged. And in that policy, it laid out some pretty visionary work for space for the Department of National Defense, the Canadian Forces moving forward, which goes to what General Crider's points were around defending and protecting, and this idea and concept that space isn't some far-off bastion. It is really a special province of warfighters, and that we need to get after that from a military perspective to ensure the security and sovereignty of our nation or our nations collectively. And as we look at kind of that conversation around what really is dual use, it is really hard now from a Canadian perspective, but also from a global Western partner perspective, allies and partners perspective, to get after really the dividing line between pure military or pure civilian and what is dual use. And I think that's part of the calculus when we look at the future for Canada and the future for how we interpret the investments that are required to defend and protect our critical infrastructure as Canadians. And so the example I'll give you is, we were the third spacefaring nation, and we've got multiple decades of experience from a both military and civilian whole of government perspective of putting things into space. We don't have as much experience in defending and protecting those things in space because that concept is rather new. But we have understood as a nation what it is to defend our critical infrastructure and our critical national interests. And space is rapidly becoming one of those core functions of national sovereignty and national security that we have to defend and protect. And so it's more than just, hey, individual satellites and which ones are military and how we're going to protect that, but really taking a whole of society, whole of government look at that critical infrastructure piece. I would argue that right now, 20 to 25% of the economy and critical national infrastructure for Canada relies on space or space-based effects. And so as you start to look at that, and what would it mean for a day without space in terms of impact on our economy, that is the important part that we kind of think through and look at how we do that investment properly across the national mission areas to ensure that for the country.
In terms of working with the other countries, then, how important do you feel, or the Canadian military feel, the collaboration with allies is, or the U.S. and or our other allies? Is it very much feeling like a team sport these days?
It is, and it has to be frank. It is allied by design, partner by design. No single nation can handle the vastness of this domain on its own. And so it's about providing and aligning complementary activities and not all going after the same, basket of goods. And so when we look at kind of partnerships we have from a continental defense perspective, I look at the relationships we've had with NORAD, US, Canada over a long period of time, but also how we interact with US Space Command and the US Space Force on a binational basis. And so looking at that, Canada is one of the founding members of multinational force Operation Olympic Defender. And in that, it's 7 nations that are committed to this space domain awareness and protect and defend mission set that is critically important, not just for an individual country, but for all of us. And it takes a community to make us safe, secure, and sovereign as individual nations.
Very good. Thanks.
Back over to you, General Crider. You served as the inaugural Chief Technology and Innovation Officer for the United States Space Force. What technologies or innovations did you prioritize to enhance the U.S. military operations in space?
Mike, technology advancements have been so critical to the advancement of space. These things have gone hand in hand, kind of like what we were talking about earlier with regards to, the importance of investments. And certainly in the investment community has helped spur on these technology advancements. You can't talk about space and space technology without talking about reusable rockets and the advancements in rocket launch that certainly has driven the entire space economy and space capabilities for defense. So what we've seen in the launch business has been significant in terms of our ability to launch capabilities into space, to get those capabilities on orbit faster and at a much lower cost than what we've been able to do before. So all of that technology that's been able to help us figure out how to reuse the launch rockets themselves, the launch vehicles, and be able to, deploy capabilities into space much quicker. Hand in hand with that goes the proliferation of satellites, the advancement of small sats, getting more capability into much smaller space vehicles, and then being able to build those out very quickly at scale, again, at a much lower cost, has been another significant technological enhancement that has really driven our space capabilities. So those two things combined have been huge. Now, what are some of the other technology areas that come on the heels of launch and space vehicles and in the advancements of small sats? Well, it comes down to what's in the payloads. And, we're seeing so many advancements in payload capabilities that have integrated artificial intelligence to improve sensing technologies, for example. So sensing from space, we can see images on the ground more clearly at much higher resolution, that we're able to process that data much more effectively, either on orbit or when it gets to the ground, or both. being able to sense in space and being able to discern what objects are doing in space. As I mentioned earlier, those threats in space are very concerning. It's very hard to depict what's the threat and what's not, where all the debris is. Not all the threats are adversarial. Some are, in fact, environmental in terms of a lot of debris is up there. How do you know what's debris and what's not? How do you avoid the debris? Artificial intelligence helps us deal with that problem significantly. And we're seeing artificial intelligence being applied across every single mission area that the United States Space Force, and I know our allies around the world, are very active in. Space domain awareness, satellite communications, space control, the ability to, really get up close to and be able to observe what's happening in space through some sort of remote proximity operations, being able to better protect the environment from electronic warfare attacks, being able to assure the availability of satellite communications by optimizing when that communication is going to be available to whom and be able to prioritize much more quickly. All of these kinds of things, these capabilities are being advanced through the use of artificial intelligence. And then we have to look at cyber, securing our space assets, securing our capabilities on the ground, being able to do that, a very rapid, continuous monitoring, looking for anomalies throughout the entire space system is a really important piece. There's AI that comes into play there, but there's other technologies as well that help to secure our space systems, not the least of which is the advancements in cryptography and the advancements in encryption and the advancements in quantum technologies that are going to continue to be important for space and space-based communications. There's more capabilities coming that are going to continue to advance on-orbit power and propulsion and the ability to move around in space very quickly, to be able to support on-orbit servicing of assets in space so that you don't just have to rely on launch to be able to have capabilities sustain longer or move capabilities around and get them out of the way, get the debris out of the way. So these are just some of the ways in which we're seeing technology continue to advance our space capabilities. It really is an exciting time. We can do so much more in space and certainly on the ground in supportive space than we could ever do before because of the ability for technology to take us further and farther.
It is really amazing if we think about it, where just even a couple of years ago where we were with what the capabilities are, the launch rate. I'm here down at the Kennedy Space Center for a meeting, and at breakfast, someone said, "Oh, there's a launch in like 15 minutes." We walked out to the beach outside the hotel and watched it. It's almost like, we're not to the point where it's like airplanes taking off, but it's kind of like, oh yeah, how many launches are there today? Is there one later in the afternoon we can watch it? So the rate has just been amazing, and just in the last couple of years, how it's really skyrocketed, let's say, where what we're able to do is just gone up by such a huge factor. And of course, more launches means more satellites, more technology, more discovery, and so on.
This is Houston, contact with a test. 1. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
Mike Greenley, private industry has contributed to the increase of commercial satellites. How are companies like MDA Space collaborating with the Canadian Space Agency and other military branches to enhance its satellite capabilities?
I think with military branches, I think we do a lot of stuff like to look at the roadmaps of our technology. We're getting more vertically integrated with our satellite technologies lately through mergers and acquisitions, so that we're able to have more control and predictability over our technical roadmaps. I'm finding that some of the solutions that we're developing commercially are able to help the militaries get comfortable accelerating their roadmaps. So for example, the whole notion of software-defined satellites. We have a full digital satellite that we operate commercially, and as a result of that capability, which brings great efficiency to commercial constellations for our customers doing broadband networks and direct to cell phone, direct to device networks, we're able to now actually be ahead of some of the military roadmaps, which is not normal. In the past, you'd have militaries might lead in R&D and some technologies, and then it would be adapted commercially. In this aspect of space, we're seeing that, fully digital, dynamically reconfigurable satellites, and what we're able to get with the volumes in the commercial sector are advancing the technologies and able to then bring them to the military operations and help them get comfortable that they can bring those roadmaps forward quicker. In some cases, you can be up there doing a service to do an activity commercially, civilly, but then you could, pick up a task and go and do something militarily in support of a military activity. So, we can work back and forth together as a result of working both sides of the dual use equation.
Yeah.
General Horner, from your perspective, we've got all this technology we just talked about, all these new technologies in space that are available to support military activity, capability, and operations. What do you find are some of the biggest challenges in integrating new space technologies into military operations?
There's a significant reticence about taking brand new technology and trying to accelerate it into the big military machine. AI is one of those things that if we don't harness, maybe not the same way our adversaries are harnessing it, we're kind of losing the cognitive load war in terms of what machines can do for us versus what humans need to do and be part of that loop. And so, working within the system, I've watched for several years us try to fight through the bureaucracy and risk matrix of how much AI can we handle at a time and how much data processing can we handle that's done by something else. But I think we're seeing ourselves at an inflection point in that commercial military mix where maybe the military doesn't have to own all of the data processing and all of the data and all of the sensors and all of the satellites. There is a way for us to get after this problem, especially from a tipping and queuing perspective, where we can harness what commercial industry has available in terms of the data sets or data aggregation or data fusion that maybe a single military or even a group of militaries or group of nations doesn't individually have or control. Leveraging commercial industry's talents and leveraging the fact that they are moving a lot faster in that uptake of AI enablement and machine learning and the processing power that maybe they can harness faster is an avenue for us to go down. So I look at that from a national perspective, and we've recently had an election here in Canada, and we have our very first minister who has artificial intelligence responsibilities in their title. And as we look at that, it is Canada taking this to the next step. It's taking this look at AI and saying, hey, how as a government do we incorporate it, not just in our military, but in all the systems so that we're delivering efficient, effective services or the efficient, effective protection of sovereignty, if you want to go down that road, for Canadians. And I think AI is one of those things. But I think General Crider pulled on that thread of launch capability and responsiveness and resilience. And I kind of want to dwell there for a sec. Canada doesn't yet have sovereign launch capability, but I think we're very close to getting there. And I think we're going to see how that opens up parts of the economy and parts of commercial growth to allow us that resilience in space. It's great to have multiple $10 billion projects from a U.S. space side to be able to build constellations of everything imaginable and every phenomenology. But as a smaller country from a spacefaring perspective, we have to be very prescriptive in how we spend the money and how we do that investment for this country. And so looking at resilience is important. You can't compete with an adversary who's willing to put 1,000 military satellites in space. And so when I look at that, it's not about, hey, do we try to put 1,000 satellites in space? It is, what do we need to do to be able to be responsive or resilient in the face of that threat? And so, growing part of that out from a Canadian perspective is incredibly important because it allows us, A, to be that good partner on this continent, to be able to deliver both military and civilian effects for the betterment of continental defense and the continent, but also build out our own sovereign capabilities to be resilient in the face of an adversary who may want to bring harm against our capabilities, which then ties back to that critical infrastructure piece. So that unlocks something that, to use the pun, launches us into the next conversation about what do we do for resilience. And then I think the one other topic that we kind of brought up was this rendezvous and proximity operations or in-orbit servicing and maintenance. So when I think about those are the big three for me. It is that incorporation of AI from a data processing, cognitive human load perspective to allow us to focus on what we need to do as the human element of that humans in the loop and on the loop. It is the development and prosecution of sovereign launch from this country in support of both our own national interests, but also from a partnership with the U.S., with the continental defense piece, and with NATO. And then how do we get after rendezvous proximity operations and do that, A, clean up our own used up, dead space debris that we've left up there, but also extend the life and the resilience of our capabilities so that we can maneuver without regret in the face of the threat.
Thanks. General Crider, you've often emphasized that space is integral to every military mission. How does space-based assets support operations across the different military branches? What are some of your favorite examples?
Well, for sure, this has been important since the beginning of, space capabilities in military operations is the advancements of SATCOM. Satellite communications in support of warfighting operations around the world have been, just really fundamental. Every military operation, I would argue, depends on SATCOM at some level. And especially if you're in remote environments, if you're on the move, you've got to be connected, and SATCOM is your way to do that. So that's been critical. And the advances in SATCOM, continue to be important, especially with, the growth of proliferated satellite capabilities, proliferated SATCOM have been really key. Hand in hand with that, I would say, is space-based sensing. Sensing capabilities on the ground, supporting intelligence analysts, being able to see, where there might be threats emerging before they become problematic. This has been critical in the missile warning and missile tracking arena for a long time. And, certainly was an impetus for, why we stood up the U.S. Space Command to begin with back in the 80s. This whole idea of being able to, look down at the Earth to see where there are impending threats and to be able to mobilize ahead of those threats has been critical. Of course, now we're using, these kinds of assets, sensing assets from all orbits, and a lot of different types of phenomenology, a lot of different ways to understand changes in the environment and changes in various domains. So being able to sense not just things happening on the surface of the Earth, but also to be able to sense what's happening in the air domain, to be able to sense and understand what's happening in the space domain, as I mentioned earlier. Now, we also see that, as space has emerged as a warfighting domain, meaning that so many adversaries recognize the importance of space, they recognize our dependence on space, they recognize how much joint warfighting operations and coalition operations depend on space, they will do what they can to try to thwart those capabilities and to present threats to those capabilities by jamming our satellite communications or impacting our ability to use those capabilities. The advancements in position navigation and timing have also been critical to joint warfighting operations, also been subject to jamming and spoofing, as well as to non-adversarial challenges as well. So, the ability to support the rapid movement of troops around the world, the ability to support, navigation and the ability to get, bombs on target. You can't really be assured in your ability to, conduct your warfighting operations if you can't rely on those kind of capabilities. So those are the things that, we bear in mind as we think about joint warfighting operations.
Yeah. General Horner, as space becomes increasingly central to military operations around the world, how does military thinking need to evolve to keep pace with the challenges and opportunities of this new domain?
Yeah, it's the perennial question. And it's sort of like, how do you keep up with AI? Well, you start using AI. How do you keep up with space? You use it more and you get used to it. So the focus area for us, as an example, is to enable the joint force to project power forward and or protect the joint force from space-enabled attack. And when I talk in those words, people are like, like things flying down from space to blow up the joint force. No, it is obscuring our movements on the ground, in the air, and the sea, the same way we used to use camouflage, the same way during the Second World War there was an entire inflatable fleets of non-flying aircraft and tanks to obscure from intelligence collection the realities on the ground. And I think when we start to think about the joint force gaining its tactical, operational, and decisional level advantage to overcome an adversary, you have to think back to, hey, that ISR, that intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capability that we employ, the adversary is employing it with their own constellation of things. And how do we overcome that? And I would say the majority of the joint force is just starting to have that conversation. I remember, 15 years ago, there were reports that were produced called SAT-RANs, and you could tell a ship or you could tell an Army unit or you could tell an Air Force unit, hey, at this time, this one ISR satellite that exists from the adversary will fly over you. So during that moment, everybody hide. And then after that moment, it's fine because there's only one. Well, that time is gone. There are so many constellations of satellites, not just individual ISR satellites, that it's now about what are we employing to counter those effects? How are we changing joint doctrine and joint warfighting to deliver counter space effects, not to create space debris, but to obfuscate the actions of the joint force in the traditional domains of land, air, and sea? And so that's the biggest evolution that we have to undertake. There's always going to be space nerds talking about space nerd stuff. And that is, you need more SATCOM, or you need more this, or you need more C2 structure, or we need to be able to enable the force. But as we kind of go through that piece of how do we protect the joint force from space-enabled attack, that goes back to that building of domain awareness, building of space control capabilities, which give us that ability to, much like controlling the air, controlling the land, controlling the sea, we can control the domain that is space and then deliver effects against an adversary in a temporary, reversible, or maybe permanent fashion that gives the joint warfighter on the ground that decisional operational advantage to ultimately prevail in any conflict.
Cool. So these are like key priorities and stuff for the future. General Crider, what do you think from a U.S. Space Force perspective they should be focusing on next?
Well, I love what General Horner had to say there. I think that more and more, all of the services around the world that are employing space capabilities are seeing the importance of being able to protect those space assets and being able to protect operations in every domain, as General Horner pointed out, from the adversary's ability to use those assets against our forces or to blight our forces' abilities to be effective. So I think that, General Horner is absolutely spot on in his comments there. I just want to kind of reemphasize an important point that the U.S. Space Force continues to make, and I know General Horner made this earlier, is the importance of partnerships and international partnerships. This is going to continue to be a critical area of focus for the United States Space Force, and I know in partnership with its allies and partners around the world, space is such a huge domain of operation, and the ability to control the domain, to maintain superiority in the domain, to thwart our adversaries' use of the domain against our forces in any other domain is going to require a team effort. And it's going to require the coming together of all of our spacefaring friends around the world to really work together. General Saltzman talks a lot about, partnering to win and recognizing the importance of the contributions that allied partners can make in providing support and services so that we can effectively work together and operate together in our coalition operations, because we're all contributing capabilities to the domain and in support of the domain in a very coordinated and collaborative way. So I think that the Space Force is going to continue to emphasize that, and is probably going to emphasize it even more going forward. It will continue to be an area of importance that I know many of the coalition partners welcome and will continue to do so. We're seeing more and more countries around the world, not just our traditional Five Eyes partners, but more and more countries around the world, seeing the importance of space and wanting to participate in it and looking for ways to collaborate with the U.S. So organizing ourselves to be effective in that regard is going to be a key focus area for the United States Space Force.
Excellent. Thanks very much. I think in the interest of time, we'll have to wrap it up there for today. I think that was an excellent conversation. I wanted to thank General Crider and General Horner for your time today to talk about military operations in space. We certainly learned that the vastness of space requires collaboration across all militaries and all allies around the world, in addition to changing the nature of military operations based on the proliferation of capability in space, and also a nice chat about the changing dynamic in terms of government, military, industrial collaboration, as we all work together to be able to enhance our capabilities, sovereignty in space. Thanks very much for the time today. Thanks also to our listeners for listening to the podcast. I'm Mike Greenley from MDA Space.
And I'm Mike Massimino.
This is Next Giant Leap. To hear more episodes from this series, subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts, or visit gzeromedia.com/next-giant-leap.
Next Giant Leap is produced by GZERO's Blue Circle Studios for MDA Space. To learn more about partnership opportunities with GZERO, head to gzeromedia.com/advertise.